Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and demons. Let's talk for the last time about Evil Dead the game. On September the 19th, 2023, the official Twitter account for Saber Interactive's Evil Dead the game tweeted the following message. To the Evil Dead the game community, today we have made the decision not to pursue the development of new content for Evil Dead the game. We also confirm that we will not be releasing a Nintendo Switch version of the game. We will keep the servers up for the foreseeable future and address any major issues that arise. On behalf of the entire team at Saber, thank you for all the groovy times and your continued support. And with that, another Dead ASIM game to add to the genre's body count. And if you'd have asked anyone over the past few months, I don't think you'd find anybody who's really, surprised. Evil Dead's had a rough time of it, to the point I'd argue the game has never really had the renaissance I believe it deserved. And even long before that fateful message landed, there was an implicit awareness among the Evil Dead community that this news would be coming sooner rather than later. But why? Why was everyone so sure that Evil Dead was coming to an undignified halt? And what decisions did the game's developers, Saber Interactive, take that may have set this game on its road to ruin? Today we'll be examining the circumstances surrounding the death of Evil Dead the game, and in effect, conducting an autopsy, to find the cause of death and consider how another development team may have avoided this tragedy. To figure out exactly how this game met its grisly end, we need to cast our minds back and look at the first days of this game's lifespan. December 10th, 2020, when it was announced at the Game Awards. Much of the game looked pretty similar to the final version of the game released on May 13th, 2022. With elements of the asymmetrical nature, the looter-shooter style, and the inclusion of big names from Evil Dead's history, led by the man himself, Ash Williams, voiced once again by Bruce Campbell. The hype was pretty muted. I think much of that lackluster reception was down to the absolutely massive lineup at that year's Game Awards. Remember, 2020's Game Awards brought us teasers for Dragon Age, Mass Effect, the Callisto Protocol, Perfect Dark, Ark 2, and fucking Sephiroth coming to Smash. Evil Dead the game just sort of fell by the wayside, and it really didn't help that the Horde-style third-person zombie shooter niche that year was being contested by Back 4 Blood, the successor to Left 4 Dead, one of the most popular zombie games of all time. But look at this Eurogamer article about the announcement. The Among Us airship map got a full trailer link while Evil Dead squeaked it into the footnotes. Hell, I didn't even know Among Us had an airship map until I read this article, and I watched the Game Awards that year. Even on the day of its first preview, Evil Dead struggled to get seen by the people who really needed to see it, and I think in hindsight it set the tone for the game's future. Fast forward to 2022, and the Evil Dead marketing machine was working its hardest it ever would to get the game in front of an audience. Bruce and other stars like the inimitable Diane DeLorenzo were giving interviews and showing teasers, the console beta looked promising, and they got fucking Method Man to do a song for the game.
That boomstick, get your boom boom click, my flow. Make the room sick, then put the 666 below. Y'all like who this? Masking a MFer like Loomis. I do this so deadly with mics like Dr. Loomis.
While it wasn't exactly everywhere, the red carpet was kind of being rolled out for this one, and the game released as an Epic exclusive on PC. In short, oh shit. And in long, oh shit. This was a mistake, because if there's one thing you don't want your game to do when it's at risk of being overshadowed by other games releasing at the same time, and that's releasing into a subgenre that's super hard to break into, it's releasing that game onto fucking Epic instead of Steam. By releasing it onto Epic only, you're forcing your consumers to come to you, because Epic is a terrible platform, literally only carried by individual games that make you want to come and play on it, like Fortnite. If your game needs to find the biggest player base it can, releasing on Epic exclusive is like a fisherman trying to catch the most fish and deciding to go to an aquarium. Yes, there is fish in there, but you're not going to find as many as you would out in the open, and those you do likely aren't in there for you. This sentiment was echoed by players who I could tell from the comments on my Evil Dead videos were earnestly interested in the game but were put off by the game's hefty price tag and Epic exclusivity. It did eventually come to Steam, but by then it was too little too late. We'll be covering why later, but I think if a single big mistake could be attributed to Saber setting this game up for failure, it would be this. Epic exclusivity poisoned this game. Even discounting the discoverability issues, Epic's a really janky platform, and Evil Dead relying on its social features caused a complete disaster which persisted until the game added its own friends list a couple of months in. While Epic exclusivity was by far the biggest single cause of this game's woes, There was a lot more to Evil Dead's swift and brutal demise than that, and it can be summed up in a single word: neglect. Saber Interactive, the developers of Evil Dead responsible for maintaining the game's live health, let the game down through a chronic and continuous case of neglect that lasted the game's entire life, and I want to talk you through the game's 3 major failing points to show you what went wrong and what Saber could have done about it. And these things are gameplay issues, new player onboarding, and content updates. Evil Dead's gameplay issues were, in my opinion, the least of its worries, because once you got settled into the game properly, Evil Dead was an amazing, rich, and deliciously complex experience you couldn't really get anywhere else. For survivors, the combat system was a blast, kind of like playing Horde mode but against an actual player, with looter-shooter elements the vein of PUBG or Fortnite to hold the gameplay loop together. And Demon, oh lord, Demon was something else, man. Pulling off clutch possession plays, 1v4ing with the boss, flipping cars, assembling an army of deadites to swarm towards unsuspecting players, and it was just so unlike any other game I ever played, and it was magical. At least when it worked, because that seems to be tradition for the early days of any ASIM game. The GTA meta, where survivors abuse the extreme safety and prevalence of cars to speed run objectives and avoid interacting with the demon, was a scourge on the game and ruined a lot of high-level demon play for the better part of a year. And that isn't to mention things like survivors dropping weapons during the possession animations, the stun lock cheese or infinite vaults, using cars to body block objectives, and a healthy amount of bug abuse like the infamous blue hunting rifle or Shemp's colour duplication exploits. The issues seemed to be never-ending. As soon as one became resolved, another would rear its ugly head. And this, combined with Demon's naturally high skill floor, made the role quite the acquired taste, especially at the high levels of play. This resulted in what I'm going to call the VHS effect. The low pool of Demon players caused survivor queue times to skyrocket, which caused survivor players to stop playing as well because the only mode that they cared about had super long queue times. I don't think queue times ever got quite as long as VHS's did. I don't think I ever sat around for 20 minutes at a time waiting for a game, but they did get really lengthy. And the sheer unpopularity of Demon was something that Saber needed to address. And they just didn't, or at least didn't get on top of the issues with the role anywhere near enough to make a meaningful difference. This was not helped when Demon players started to find solutions to these issues themselves, that were just as parasitic to the game's health, trending towards either early game rush matters like Puppeteer or later Schema, who were able to wipe out teams in just a couple of minutes, or a super passive farming playstyle, where you just didn't engage with the enemy team at all and chose to instead all in the Necronomicon at the end, which was pretty dull, but also the only way the gutter tier demons like Henrietta and Evil Ash should get a win. These issues were solvable: tone down cars, rebalance the strength of Puppeteer and Schema, and rework the book stage to be more interactive when giving those lower tier demons the buffs they needed to stand a chance without the book. But Saber mostly just didn't bother, or in the case of cars, bothered way too late for it to matter. This made high-level Evil Dead play kind of a coin flip. If you got a chill lobby, you had some really fun interactive games. If you got the gamers, you were in for a fight for your life to try and maintain some agency in the match, and this wasn't sustainable. Well, on its own it might have been, because Evil Dead is not the only ASIM to have been plagued with these issues in the past. And I'd argue a lot of the time it was still better balanced at the highest levels than a lot of other ASIMs on the market at the time. But none of that really mattered, because Saber had fumbled a key part of getting people to play your game, and keep the player base steady and growing: new player onboarding. Compared to other ASIM games, Evil Dead's always been ridiculously complicated. The demon role is so full of bells and whistles, little things that make or break your gameplay experience, that picking up the role on your own was basically impossible, especially with a fairly limited tutorial. And while Survivor wasn't that hostile on its own to new players, the very fact that you had to know what the demon was capable of to effectively play against it made the role complicated by proxy. Don't get me wrong, there are lots of ways to learn Survivor gameplay mechanically. The solo missions were actually fantastic for that, but they didn't prepare you for your first few matches, and the progression system made this worse, because it made sure that new players were objectively and significantly weaker than a highly grinded veteran. It was a pretty hostile system for new players, and part of that is just inherent to the game. A complicated game will be hard to get into, and Evil Dead being complicated is part of its charm. It's not a bad thing by itself. But where Saber dropped the ball was in things like the progression being so slow, new characters being locked behind fairly high paywalls on top of the game's steep initial price tag, a poor tutorial experience, and a lack of AI matches for Demon. Even the game being Epic exclusive fall under this category. It's hard to get new players to buy a $35 game, but it's even harder to convince them to install a whole new launcher to do it. And even harder still to get them to convince their buddies to do it. Source: I was that friend trying to get my compadres to get Evil Dead. And when I think all the ones who did would say they didn't regret picking it up, it was a hell of an argument to get them to try it, and I literally talk about games for a living. And let's not forget here, really crappy tutorials and new player onboarding aren't uncommon among ASIM games. Despite this complexity, Evil Dead was never the worst for this, but these things tend to be mitigated in large enough communities. Because if you don't know what you're doing, chances are you can open Twitch or YouTube and look up the game directory to find out where the hell you're meant to be. You can see that through Texas Chainsaw now. Even if the game gets between 4,000 and 5,000 players a day on Steam, it regularly gets double that on Twitch, because the content creation community is cultivated as large, welcoming and friendly to newcomers. Evil Dead has never had that, and here's where I would say Saber really dropped the ball. The Twitch category for Evil Dead was typically very thin on the ground, to the point that back when I streamed regularly, I was getting between 50 and 30 viewers on my streams, and would frequently be one of the top viewed streamers for the game at any given time. A few times I was the only demon player streaming on the platform at all. And on YouTube, things weren't much better. I and other creators noticed that Evil Dead was pretty much poison for your views, and even high established creators just weren't talking about it very much, if at all. I was pretty surprised at this, so in an attempt to turn things around, I approached Saber's community management team with a proposition to expand the Tales of the Cabin series, to hopefully get interviews or statements from people on Evil Dead's creative team to talk about the adaptation process. This email got no response, and I had to shelve the series after a second episode because, between the difficulty monetizing the content, the time they took to make, and frankly the damage they did to my view count, I couldn't afford to commit to the project. I don't have sour grapes about Saber not wanting to work with me. I certainly didn't expect that they'd jump at the chance or anything, but I at least thought if not me, then Saber would want to work with somebody, right? There was no Fog Whisperer or Rewinder style affiliate program to drive community figures to want to play the game. For official recognition and support from Saber, it's like they were actively allergic to the concept of cultivating creators to play their game. And without creators to draw you to the game, to show you the ropes and break down new content updates, a lot of the potential viewers and players Evil Dead could have had were flushed down the toilet. There were at least some creators of note who played the game at least fairly regularly. Pixels was kind of the Evil Dead guy on YouTube, and I know Running Man and One Stalky Boy played it on Twitch on a semi-regular basis, but I'll be real with you, the only place that had any sort of community feel where discussion and dialogue was felt was on the game's subreddit, and that just isn't enough. I will admit there was a time when Saber did work with creators to try and expand the game's horizons, but that time was only for the few months immediately following the game's release. It was clear that what they ended up doing was not community collaboration, trying to get creators and players on board, so much as a marketing outlet. They used creators to show their game to viewers for a little bit, but showed no inclination to keep those viewers long term and convert them into a loyal and stable community. If you're not going to throw a bone to the creators who might want to play your game and share it with their viewers, don't be surprised when those creators and viewers ditch your game to go and find somebody who will. By neglecting to dedicate basically any resources to creating and running a community that welcomed and helped new players, Saber ensured that old players that were ground away through attrition were very difficult to replace. And that put the game on borrowed time long before it all officially shut down. And this leads us into what I consider to be the most annoying reason for Evil Dead's downfall, and it's annoying because it's so obvious. The post-release content cycle, or rather, the lack thereof. One thing I don't think we appreciate enough about many live service game models like DBD or Overwatch is the regular expectations of new content. Not just new arrivals coming quickly, but consistent new content, such that at any given time, we know when to expect the next chapter or season or automatic drop or whatever else. If you find yourself getting bored, you can take a break between these updates, knowing there'll be an approximate time that you'll be able to come back and enjoy the new content again, and it's what makes the player numbers of these games relatively stable. Evil Dead did not have this regular release schedule. You had no idea when the next content or even balance update was coming, and from like Ruby onwards, every update had this unshakable feeling of being the last one, and that's really not the vibe you want your game to have. I think that should really need saying, but here we are a year on, and I guess that's a lesson that Saber never managed to learn. Evil Dead had only 5 patches in the whole of 2023, one of which was a hotfix to a patch that came out a week prior, and they were totally inconsistent with no real fanfare or warning that they were coming. When your entire release schedule is just soon TM, it becomes impossible to manage player expectations, and long-term holdouts will get tired of waiting for you to get your act together and will start off to another game. This really wasn't helped by quite a few missed opportunities and cancelled projects on Saber's behalf. The fact that the most commercially successful Evil Dead film of all time released to massive acclaim and there was no content pertaining to it, not even an event in the game, was just bizarre. And there was a bunch of other obvious misses too. The Adios Elagos solo mission had illustrations designed for it but got axed at the last minute, and Jane Levy, who played Mia in the 2013 remake of Evil Dead, was meant to voice the character for the Evil Dead 2013 update, but due to miscommunication somewhere, she didn't end up doing so. Saber didn't release much content for Evil Dead, and it wasn't originally set schedule, so I don't really see a reason for these things to have happened, beyond some mismanagement issues somewhere along the line, and it further affirms to me what the last 6-ish months of Evil Dead's lifespan had already suggested. By the end, and probably quite a bit before that end, Saber just didn't know what they were doing, and at some point in the past year gave up trying to understand. I hope this video has been enough to convince you that Evil Dead was a truly great game that was kind of set up to fail by the developer that straight up didn't know what to do with it. I'm not going to say there was some active conspiracy to kill Evil Dead, I'm not on that much copium, but it's pretty plain to me that Saber didn't realise what they were making, and with other games in production at the studio like Space Marine 2, Gloomhaven and the remake of Knights of the Old Republic, the teams dedicated to new content and maintenance for Evil Dead got pulled away to other projects. But there is a silver lining to this cloud. Despite Saber ceasing active development or new game content, the servers are staying up, at least for the foreseeable future, meaning Evil Dead is still playable, and still pretty fun. Much of the Demon and Survivor footage from this video was recorded after the announcement went up, and queue times are still actually okay. I was never in queue for more than 3 minutes at either side, so if you still want to boot up Evil Dead the game, or even pick it up for the first time, it's a game I would always recommend to play and stand by, even if the devs won't. The game's final state is actually pretty good. They fixed chain fears with Baal, cars finally got nerfed, and the game is the healthiest and most balanced it's ever been. So maybe if you haven't played in a while or just want to give it a go while we still got it, you could do worse than booting it up. So even though the game has finally popped its clogs, I wish Evil Dead the game a very groovy afterlife. I'll probably still play it from time to time. Boot it up when I feel the urge to possess some scrubs until the servers finally give up the ghost. But whether my time with this game ends with Saber pulling the plug on the servers or with me just moving on, I'm always going to remember this game fondly. It is a truly amazing testament to one of horror's most charming properties. And while it's a shame to see it go, I can't deny it's been fun, and hopefully it will continue to be so for plenty of players to come before the game's inevitable farewell. Hail to the king, baby, and I'll see you on the other side.